All right, want to bring in now Walser Wealth Management President Rebecca Walser. Rebecca, you're down in Florida. You know, when I see a company like that in Florida, all of a sudden, just like that, shut down. I mean, Florida's got the strongest economy in the country. Maybe Texas rivals it.
Right.
If it's happening in Florida, it's got to be happening everywhere else.
Yeah, DeSantis' policies can't save us from everything. And that's the point, unless it's the Lord God Almighty. This is coming, you know. And Powell and all of these things from the Beige Book, we shouldn't be surprised, Charles. This is what they wanted. They wanted to curb spending. They wanted retail to come down. They had to bring it down because inflation was too hot. So we're actually seeing the results. And so what do they shift from talking about inflation over to recession? Because that is the natural result of all of these raises that they've had.
And so with that in mind, right, the Fed's got to know, and I know a lot of people give the Fed like, oh, they don't have the right tools to, you know, in other words, they must use a mallet. They've got to beat this economy into submission. But they have to see themselves that it's working. Why would they continue to use the mallet? Why wouldn't they just step away and say, okay, it's happening? Yeah. People have run out of the STEMI money. Yeah. People are resorting to credit cards. Delinquencies are going through the roof. Why wouldn't they just sit back and now and just say, okay, mission accomplished?
Well, I agree with you 100%. I think Powell is starting to see weakness in labor now, which has been his stalwart that's allowed him to really have such an aggressive raise campaign. But at the same time, he was so hawkish in Jackson Hole that I see a pause this month in September, and I see October 31, November 1, we're going to get additional raise.
Two more rate hikes.
I see just pause in September,
right.
And then October, I think, will potentially be our last one.
All right. Now, you've been worried about this economy. You were one of the first that I saw in the industry worry about this economy, openly concerned about it. Now, a lot of people, you can see the spike you just saw in the recession, yes. is sort of on the same bandwagon. Yeah. How bad can it get? Well,
you know, Charles, the problem is this is not normal situation, and people don't understand that. We obviously had a pandemic. The global earth, you know, printed the equivalent of about almost 20 trillion globally to combat that stimulus. And so that had to be absorbed. That has been absorbed. But now what has it done? It has weakened our money supply. It has weakened our dollar. You know, if you look at the purchasing parity of the dollar, we actually see a big problem. And so what has to happen is the Fed actually has to have tools that won't weaken the dollar and make a $300,000 house now a $600,000 house. And that is going to take time. We have to get dollar reevaluation back to a normal level. We can't keep spending. We're a consumption-based economy, but we don't have the ability to spend. With a $7.4 trillion Fed balance sheet, if we have some kind of black swan situation, how is the Fed going to actually step in?
Well, let's talk about that. I got a minute to go, and you've got an intriguing idea how the next black swan happens. Yeah.
Well, you know, it's not being really announced and talked about here, but you know that with Johannesburg, South Africa, they made the formal announcement that Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates are joining the BRICS bloc as of January of 2024. I think they're laying the framework to allow crude trade outside of U.S. dollar for the first time since 1974, effectively ending the petrodollar and dollar hegemony along with it.
Right. And everyone should understand the dollar being the world's reserve currency. One of the things that allowed that was when we became the when Saudi Arabia said, okay, we'll only trade the crude and the U.S. dollar.
Yes.
If they move away from that, that puts a lot of pressure on us.
Well, let me just give you a perspective so you can understand. I'm not linking these two things, but I'm just saying we've had two foreign leaders that have openly talked about selling crude outside of U.S. dollar. Saddam Hussein in Iraq and Gaddafi in Libya put together a consortium of countries, African countries, that were going to sell crude outside of U.S. dollar. And you know what happened with the Arab Spring. So, I mean, we have history of people trying and it being stopped.
Before I let you go, and I got just a couple of seconds to go, you're hedging through metals?
I think, you know, gold, silver, metals are hard asset commodities that have, over the test of time and currency transitions, been the stalwart.
Rebecca, good stuff. Well thought out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charles.